On the heels of last week's school shooting in Florida, students and community members are demanding change from politicians locally and nationally. Representative Mike Coffman was met with harsh criticism and protests at a town hall this week, while students and community groups held rallies at the state capitol. Meanwhile, a protest outside of Senator Cory Gardner's office actually happened on Friday morning. Patty, sadly, Colorado's been ground zero for gun issues for almost 20 years now. Do you gather a different feel to what we're seeing this week?
What we're seeing is 20 years of buildup. I mean, Columbine has always been considered kind of the start of the new modern era of school shootings, and it's not an era anyone's really excited to see. But we found out that some of the lessons of Columbine aren't being applied now. And what's dismaying is just the more we know, the more we discover we don't know. In the case of Parkland, for example, not only were all these warning signs of the mental situation with this kid ignored, the FBI ignored messages, other people ignored messages, but you find out that the armed security guard outside waited and didn't go in. That's the first lesson that came out of Columbine, was you do not wait. If you want to save lives, you have to go in. And 20 years later, we're not following that. I think the fact that kids are mobilizing and arguing is great. They better get educated at the same time, because we all, as I'm guessing I'll hear very quickly from David, we all have very different opinions on guns, but there are certain facts you can agree on. There are over 300 million guns out in America right now, so no matter what gun laws are passed, we still have to deal with that. We all agree that the mental health issue is critical, and we have to figure out how to compare the information and how to deal with troubled people. I think this is not like the Children's Crusade during the Crusades. This is not some quixotic campaign that is going to end really, really horribly. I think it's good they'll get active. It feels much more like the late 60s with Vietnam. People will get out and make a difference. How it's going to happen, it's too soon to tell.
David, what did you make of how Congressman Coffman handled the protests we saw in the town hall?
Well, as always, he's pretty unflappable, and you know, a guy who's been a Marine and done a number of combat tours sometimes comes away with a lot of equanimity and poise. It says everything that when he said he's open to considering new gun controls that comply with the Second Amendment, he was booed for that. So this issue, as in previous times, it's not about the X or Y or Z gun control du jour, although we can certainly talk about those things. But the fundamental energy of those who were booing Coffman is hostility to the right to keep and bear arms at all, and to the right of self-defense. Patty, of course, everything she said was exactly right. We have learned nationally so many lessons from Columbine, and those lessons have been applied and stopped many, many, many school shootings because people have done the see something, say something. It was flagrantly ignored, of course, in Parkland by the incompetent FBI and Broward Sheriff's Office. And then on top of that, as she also says, the police tactics have changed, and they say if there's an active shooter, you go in with what you got, and that's better, because at the least you can lay down what's called suppression fire, where you may not kill the guy, but if you're shooting at him, that's a huge distraction from him being able to aim at other people. And of course, that was ignored as well. It's probably all, 11 of the 13 fatalities at Columbine were attributable to the police failure to enter the building in a timely manner. And probably the Pulse nightclub had a lot of those deaths were, again, a failure to enter when the active shooting was actually going on and the police had already arrived. And same thing here. But the good thing is that's not the norm anymore. Now, most non-cowardly, responsible law enforcement officers will run in and take action.
Penn, let me ask you about what we're seeing from the protests, because sadly we have a history of seeing a mass shooting, people getting angry on both sides, a lot of vocal protests, and a week or two goes by, maybe a few weeks go by, and then we're on to something different as a community, as a society. Does this feel any different to you from what you're seeing?
It does feel different, but then, mind you, we could see the same thing again where everybody's outraged for 10 days and it goes away. But I agree with Patty, and in other conversations I've shared, this feels a lot more like the 60s and 70s in the beginning coalescence of a movement, generated and sort of sparked by young people who have basically said, we're tired of being victimized, we're tired of being helpless, you're the adults, but you won't do what we think is reasonable to protect us, so we're just going to raise a little hell until somebody pays attention and starts to do something. That's how sentiment changed towards the Vietnam War. That's how 18-year-olds got the right to vote. That's how a number of things changed in this country, and this feels a lot like that. Mike Coffman, I don't always agree with him, but we have to give him props. He at least walked into a room and did a town hall meeting in person, unlike Cory Gardner and others phoning it in because they didn't want the displeasure of having people look them in the eye and say, we think you're not doing your job or you're wrong. Coffman stood there and took it. And he needs to, and a number of other elected officials need to, because I don't think this issue is going away. Because now it's not just kids, but now their parents are getting angry, saying, all right, I'm not sending my kids to school to be subjected to this crap. Do something about it. And I think it's interesting that Coffman is equivocating. And, you know, the theater shooting, Aurora Theater shooting, was in his district. And so you've got people saying, you know, what's the deal? How can you not be all over this issue? And I think they have a legitimate point. One last thing I'd offer, and it's to David's point, and I think we shouldn't get confused. I think a lot of the folks who are outraged about what's going on, I don't think their outrage is with the Second Amendment and your right to bear and keep arms in your home to defend your home and your family and your property. They are questioning the sanity of letting military-style weapons be out in the community where anybody can buy them and get them and tote them around and do stuff like this, because we don't have comprehensive background checks and we don't have some other common sense measures in place. And that's what I think people are getting tired of.
Michael, the NRA has faced pressure before. Like, again, we've talked about this for almost 20 years in Colorado, so this is nothing new. But do they become a bigger, for lack of a better term, target because it's a bigger bad guy, and because they're tied to a lot of different elected leaders? Does that become the focus of these different protests as they move forward?
I think it's an easy thing for them to use symbolically to go after the NRA. I mean, the fact is the NRA has a ton of members. The fact is the NRA, has some impact, but it's more the people. Like here in Colorado, which we'll, I'm sure we'll get to talking about the state level stuff. The recalls happened because voters decided to get rid of people who passed these gun laws, and so I do think that they're kind of made as the bad guy in this. I do want to say something positive about the media in this. I think they are biased often when it comes to this issue and others, but they do give us access to the human aspect of what happens. So, that dad that came to the White House and shared, his thoughts about his daughter dying, we get to see that in our houses, and it was really moving, I thought. And I'm agree with Patty that the students getting involved in this, becoming more politically active is a good thing. I think President Trump having people to the White House was a good thing. Rubio and Senator Nelson in Florida having the town hall, and then Mike Coffman doing a town hall and taking those questions was good. They do go after Mike Coffman a lot. It's a hostile crowd every time he has one of these. But he even got booed when he talked about the failures of the FBI. And the FBI did fail in this. The sheriff's department did fail, and they had a lot of tips that said that this guy was in trouble. And really, and you guys brought this up, but the armed guard who didn't go in and really, confront the shooter and try to kill him was a big mistake. And so I think, all these policy discussions are going to happen. They're going to continue. Both sides kind of have their positions on it. But let's talk about the things that can be fixed, and that is the process of the FBI, the Sheriff's Department, and the armed guards who are supposed to be doing something.